Hi, everyone. Happy Friday and welcome to Privacy Chat. My name is Payal Shah. I am FPF's new Digital Communications Manager, and I am here to introduce FPF CEO Jules Polonetsky, who is joined by Chelsey Colbert, FPF's Policy Counsel, for a conversation on the recent global developments surrounding mobility and privacy. Take it away, Jules.
Thanks so much and welcome. That's Pal's debut with us on screen. You show up, we put you on video and you talk because lots of our staff have a lot to say, insights and advice. So Pal, welcome, and Chelsey, welcome. So thanks everybody who's joining us for our weekly informal privacy chat. Say things in comments. We'll respond now or later about just about, well, anything to do with privacy, data protection, or I don't know. I'll talk Mideast policy if you want, but maybe we should stick to the topic. All right. So this week, Chelsey published a description of the new developments in China around mobility and connected car. And, you know, every time we see a sophisticated data protection proposal from China, you know, the initial reaction, obviously, from many stakeholders are like, China, what do you mean? Privacy, China, right? Government, surveillance, and all that sort of thing. And obviously that's true. But as many of you know, China is a complicated place and a sophisticated place. And a lot of things can exist at the same time. And China is in the midst of advancing technology regulation. Some of this you're seeing, right, as the government kind of claps down on the biggest tech CEOs, who are stepping down one after another, or having their IPOs pulled back, or having to break up their businesses, driven in large part by, concerns about the power and the activities of those companies. But China also is advancing a general privacy law, inspired in many ways by the GDPR, fairly sophisticated. And again, we can debate how the courts will handle things, is the judiciary independent, and so forth. But it's naive to think that we can simply say, hey, because there's a very different collective view about government surveillance, that the consumer regulatory structure isn't going to be built in a sophisticated way in order to seek interoperability with GDPR, with global data flows. There is obviously a competition going on around the world for standard setting. Really interesting paper. I'll post in the comments that I just saw shared today. You all know about the Brussels effect. I confess I have the book in my stack, a book called The Brussels Effect, which analyzes the way the EU exports regulation, the way they very actively not only regulate, but take a keen eye in how EU regulation impacts and shapes regulation around the world. So really looking forward to reading the book over the weekend. But this paper yesterday is called the China effect, and it's a sophisticated look at how Chinese leadership is playing a role in regulating and in promoting its regulatory models around the world. So shouldn't be a surprise that when Chelsey took a look at the Chinese proposal around cars and data, that it was a pretty sophisticated one. But before we talk about it, let's lay the groundwork for those who don't live and breathe connected cars. Let's make it clear that we're not talking just about futuristic stuff, right? I mean, so Chelsey, when we say mobility and connected car, I think most people know that cars for a long time, have had what we call a black box. I think the industry doesn't like calling it a black box. Airlines have a black box, right, that records everything. And if there's an accident, this recording device is typically activated in times of an accident so that it can capture, a snapshot of what happened before there was a car crash. Were you wearing a seatbelt? What was the speed and stuff like that? But cars today, even models that people have purchased the last couple of years, what are the kinds of data and technology that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because if you think back to the 90s, that's when the event data recorders, and then the onboard diagnostic port. And that's really about the basic car functionality. But if you fast forward to even just 5 years ago, current cars that are on the road now, I think there's really that spectrum. You can have cars that are a little bit more quote unquote dumb, where I'm sure almost everyone is familiar with pairing your cell phone with the car, having that connectivity so you can make calls through there, control your playlist, things like that. So more basic levels of connectivity. But we are really getting to the point, and this is where the analogy of smartphone on wheels has become really popular, that our cars are kind of like our laptops or like our smartphones. And with that analogy means that there's a broad ecosystem of different players, different apps, a lot of different data types being collected. So if you break down the data types, I think you can think about it in 3 ways: data about the car, data about the driver, and even data about the environment, the infrastructure. So there are a lot of different ways of breaking this apart.
The OBD port that you refer to, the onboard diagnostic, the black box, right? The proper way to call that is the event data recorder, right? The EDR. And the OBD, typically when you take your car to get repaired, plugging in a cable, frankly, lets the auto shop have a detailed diagnostic information so as to understand what is actually going on. People probably are familiar with these dongles that you can pop in to that port that have internet connectivity, and there are insurance companies already providing discounts for being a safe driver, or maybe penalties for not being so. And the latest cars, why buy a dongle, right, are interested in debates and conversations about, well, if you want to sign up for that sort of program, can that be something that is typically in the car? People probably are familiar with the well-known GM OnStar, right, where there's a full communications and safety system. So I've always thought about it as, and you, I think, put it well, as the car data, the person data, and the environment data. I think that's a great way to think about it. But let's talk about, for a minute, the kinds of sensors that we're talking about, right? So data about me. So you talked about pairing your phone. One thing that bothered me for years whenever I would rent a car is that the data from the person who rented the car before me was very often in the car. I could see, before I paired my phone, their contact books, their recent numbers called. I could see where they navigated to, and sometimes even the music that they had played. And we reached out to the rental car companies and we said, hello, you clean the car, you check it back in. Why can't you clear that information? And they said, we have 7 minutes in between the turnaround time, given the number of staff and the volume. And you know what our big priority is? Because we do care about turning over the car in good condition. The poopy diaper in the glove compartment. We have a big problem. Bless people, they've got kids, they change a diaper on the road, they got nowhere to put it. They put it in the glove compartment. And you know what happens when we forget to check the glove compartment? We rent the car with a poopy diaper in there. What is it that you want us to focus on? Clearing some technical thing? And by the way, if it was easy to do, like a button, we'd say, clear the poopy diaper and push the button. But it's not so clear. each model, and very often the models made for rental are even different than the typical model that you get on the street, right? There are different line sometimes of the vehicle that the fleets. So we need information about how each vehicle, which has it differently set up in the infotainment system. And by the way, the same model car, right? Sometimes you pay a premium, you get the better Bose speakers, you get a better infotainment system. It has a different way of clearing that information. So there's an app now that our friend at Privacy for Cars has that can help you do so. So that's what got me interested in this a couple of years ago. But so other than the information that might be left over because of how I paired my phone, what other information? There are cameras, there are sensors, there's biometrics. What kind of information about me is going to be in a car?
So first, I love that maybe we should make the poop and vapor, the smell test. Make some type of connection there with the data so that it might not smell with your nose, but there's something stinky about it. You got to get it off the car. I think you're onto something. So I'll get to the sensors and the cameras, but I think you raise a lot of really interesting points. It's about a standardized way to have access and control to this data, which is tricky in the car space because car companies want their features to be distinguished, and it's a marketing aspect to appeal to different people. And customization and personalization is really important with cars, just as it is with our cell phones. Our cell phones are all, they come to us in one form, but we customize them in different ways. So this is a challenge, the user control. And this is one thing I really encourage folks to check out the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board guidelines on connected cars, and the China blog post, because the user control aspect is really prevalent there, having easy access to deletion. And I think all of this was really important when we were thinking about the business models of yesteryear and of today, where you have the car rentals or cars being bought and sold. However, the business models are changing. We're having fleets with a lot of different cars all being used by different people, whether it's through robo-taxis, really reaching that rideshare business model that so many people have been aiming for with automated vehicles, as well as with subscriptions. So a lot of people, maybe younger folks, don't want to buy a car when it sits in their driveway most of the time, especially after the pandemic when a lot of us aren't going back to the office. So the business models are changing where car companies are thinking, well, maybe I can't sell this car, but is there a subscription model where someone can just rent it for a couple of weeks or a month? So we really need to start thinking about different users other than just the driver or the registered owner. And hopefully we can say, pardon?
Senior executives at auto companies have said to me over the years, we're not in the car business, we're in the mobility business. We're in the business of how do you get whoever you are from where you need to go to where you need to go. And that might mean scooters, and it might mean interacting with the ride share, and it might mean subscriptions, and it might mean, self-driving or trolleys. Like, we are thinking much more broadly. And like you said, that means having a relationship with individuals that might be across different models. I see our friend Luis Alberto Montezuma. Luis, maybe before you joined, I was referring to an article you tweeted that was super helpful about the China effect. If you have it handy, would love for you to post it. And thank you for flagging it to my attention. It's going to be my one of my weekend reads. Chelsey, cameras. Let's talk cameras for a minute, because that's a focus of some of your work in particular at FPF with our stakeholders, given the sensitivity of cameras, facial recognition. What are some of the ways? Obviously, we know that, self-driving cars or driver assist, we see cameras, backup cameras, so people probably have some sense. But there are also cameras that are used for, driver distraction, and what else? What are the other ways you see cameras showing up? They're not even all camera. I think like photograph or video, right? Some of them are maybe are sensors that detect space or face or?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's great. We start with, well, what exists now? A lot of people are familiar with the dash cams, with the backup camera. But what we're really seeing in this space all over the world is a push from two different angles. We have the safety, so being able to recognize, and when I say being able to recognize, I mean the car being able to recognize if someone is fatigued, if they're under the influence, if a sudden health event has happened where the driver is not able to stay in control of the car. And the second use case that's really pushing for these in-vehicle cameras or sensors is to get higher levels of automation. So when we have level 2 cars, and sorry, I'm going to get a little bit wonky here about the automation, but go Google the SAE stand, the levels of automation, or Edge Case Research's user's guide to automation. Those two different ways of looking at it. But basically, if you think of a Tesla or a lot of other types of models, Super Cruise, for example, where the human and the car are sharing some of the driving tasks. And then when you get to level 3, it's a little bit more of that handoff. Anyway, so in order to get to that, in order to safely share the driving task, we're going to have driver monitoring systems inside of the car that are able to properly detect, hey, human, are you paying attention? Are you able to take over the control because I need you to? That's essentially what the conversation is, and I'm really keeping it simple. There's a lot more that can be said about this. So those are the two basic reasons, the use cases that are pushing for in-vehicle cameras. And I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but like you said, there's a spectrum. It doesn't necessarily have to be a camera. It could be something as simple as a torque sensor on a steering wheel. So the human is always paying attention because their hands are on the wheel. But we know through the last couple of years that these types of driver monitoring systems can be easily spoofed, whether by sticking an orange in it, putting a weight on it. So this type of driver monitoring system isn't quite ideal. So we're seeing more of a push for camera-based driver monitoring systems. It really depends on the use case. It could just be eye detection. It could be the face detection. Where is the person looking? But then where you start to get in a little bit more dicey, where a lot more nuance and thought is needed, is when the driver monitoring system is making inferences or analysis about the state of mind of the human. Because if you think about it, if I'm sitting at my car, my hands are on the wheel, I'm looking out at the road, how does the camera really know if I'm paying attention or not? How does it know that I'm not daydreaming and I'm not somewhere else? So there's a whole lot going on in this space, and we are beginning to see regulation. In California, there's a bill about in-vehicle cameras. At the federal level, just recently, there was a bill that would require the DOT to mandate these and study it. So there's a lot going on from the tech side, the business model, safety, as well as from the regulatory side all around the world.
We're also seeing calls from prominent academics for bans on the use of emotional recognition. And I'm not sure that the technology here is the same as, are people smiling about my product, or are they sad, or whatever the case is. Here it's distraction, or are you looking away from the road? My understanding is that the fleets are most interested in that, especially where you've got, truckers driving, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, and the fleets, want to try to keep on top of that. So what did China do? Is this a legislative proposal? You wrote it up in detail. What was the framing that and China is a huge market for cars globally. I think people appreciate that. So, even though you may design things for different markets, the auto companies are not looking to have a very, very different vehicle, in every country. So when a huge market for cars, says, here's how it's going to work, it has global repercussions. And China obviously has also made a huge bet on, electric vehicles, and so is everybody else. But, it's a futuristic bet. It's not just that it's a huge market. It's a huge market for future automotive. And of course, there's a huge traffic problem and, huge city issues. So curious how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So it's when you're saying in the intro that people are paying attention to China when it comes to privacy regulation, it's no surprise to anybody that the US in particular pays a lot of attention to China when it comes to technology. And this is so true in the car space, the automated vehicle space. So when I saw this bill, it immediately caught my attention. I liked it because it was relatively short, but very to the point. It has really specific obligations. And like I said, the broad scope of the application, I think, is really interesting because sometimes we see privacy laws, privacy principles only apply to certain operators, whether it's the OEMs or the dealers or employers, that siloed approach, whereas this bill takes a really broad approach to operators, and it even includes insurance companies and ride-hail companies, which I think is pretty significant. It also includes, again, not just the driver or the registered user, it includes passengers and pedestrians. And this is another huge point because we need to think about all the passengers that could be in the car, especially with, like we talked about earlier, with the evolving business models. And with the cameras outside of the car, we have to think about pedestrians, group privacy. What does that mean when you have these roving robots with 24/7 cameras on it? And Germany has also released a couple decisions about this too. But for this one, those were some of the things that stuck out to me, as well as the 3 types of covered data. And I think this is really interesting because this is another theme that we're seeing in privacy laws all over the world, especially when it comes to connected cars and automated vehicles, trying to think about how do we talk about different data types. We have the personal data, but then what about the other stuff that's going on, especially with the car? Like the EDPB has said in their guidelines that almost everything from a connected car can be personal information, whether it's directly identifiable or indirectly identifiable. Jackson, then you have China introducing
one of our charts. Yeah, let's have Jackson pull up since you're referring. Maybe start. Do we have one also that we did a couple of years ago? A chart that focused on what is personal data in the car with like the towers and so on and so forth. Do we have that one as well? I know we have the dealer guide and we've got this one. I thought I saw the 3rd one as well. If not, you can bring that one back. We'll look at that one. Okay, so this is on our site. We'll post a link to it if anybody wants to dive a little deeper. We did it a couple of years ago, and I think it does a nice job of illustrating all the different places where personal data, right? We didn't really focus on, circuits and stuff, but you can see what a surprising number of places and categories and types of data and where they may be going. So, Chelsey, on the note of where that data goes, we see Apple and Google even this week saying, we keep your data on the phone. Don't worry about it. It's on the phone. It's not going anywhere. And I know I've seen some auto companies in response to some of the debates about data in the car say, well, hey, don't worry. We don't want you scared of your car, that the distraction system, which is there to, make sure you're looking at the road, you don't doze off and change lanes and get into an accident. We don't want you to feel like now you're being policed about that. You'll turn it off. You don't want to be in trouble, but we want you to use it. So we don't send that data off the car. How much of that is that a good analogy to where the phones are going? Obviously, some of this data has to go off the car. I mean, your location doesn't get situated unless, someone's bouncing off local Wi-Fi points and local routers and all that. What are you seeing about maybe let me put it like this. What are the kinds of things that we see companies doing? Ford had some icons that might help you understand what's happening. I think I heard BMW talking about keeping a lot of data on the car? What are we seeing happen? Some companies have like dashboards where you can go in and kind of, delete the data and so forth. What are you seeing in terms of industry efforts to try to do privacy by design around this?
Yeah, well, I think that's great. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that I think we're at a really good time right now with the development of technology and the kind of the redesign of cars, because it's happening with the human machine interaction with level 2 as we get into automated vehicles. I think we're at a good time. So let's also think about privacy by design. Let's think about ways to involve the driver, the passengers in that collection of data. So the notice transparency aspect is really crucial. And one of the global trends is the move beyond. You can't just rely on your website privacy policy or have it in the driver's manual. There needs to be something else, whether it's a voice assistant in the car or some type of standardized privacy icons. The privacy by design angle is huge. And with that is the data process on device. So this was in the China draft. It was also in the CNIL report on connected cars a couple years ago. And a lot of the conversations I'm having with stakeholders in the mobility space is that what can be processed on device versus what can be sent off. And I find it interesting that because there's so much data being generated by a car, by the cameras, it's not really always technically feasible or worth it for the cost of the processing to send it off device. Sometimes it makes more sense to do that processing on device and you're just sending off the insights. So I think that that's a really interesting place to explore, is like what are the use cases? Of course, you have to start with the purpose, but what are the technical limitations of this, and how can we really make that a good privacy by design story, if you will? How can we lean into that and really process on device when we can? And this was also the China regulation, when it has to be sent off of the car, how can we anonymize or de-identify that?
Here's why I'm optimistic. Online, we have this world where a lot of stuff is free because it's supported by data, and that's created a lot of privacy overhang. And I have that obviously with my mobile device as well. Last time I checked, nobody has given me a free car or a deeply subsidized car in return for my data yet. Nobody has given me a big discount for like displaying a bumper sticker with like an ad or, anything like that. It's a very competitive market. And I choose my car, right, based on either my identity, right? I'm a sports car owning sort of person. I'm a convertible. I have a flashy red car, right? It's sporty looking. And obviously, you watch the ads, you see how much the driving experience and the image, is designed to appeal to different parts of the market. And if I want more, I pay more for the leather seats or the better infotainment system. So right now, at least, all of these data uses are not driven by, awesome, there'll be an app and it'll have ads and, it'll have your location, right? Most of these features, even Consumer Reports, who is, real tough and rigorous on privacy, they're like, we want it to be mandatory that your car can see the car in front and, and stop if you're going too fast and you haven't, braked. So much of it is being driven by security, safety. I worry a little bit that the way the supply chain is built makes it hard. We saw this with mobile devices as well, right? Apple may make the phone, but then there's apps and there's chips and there's all kinds of parties. And now there's a lot of clamping down, going on. But for, years, the fact that the ecosystem was so many different players and so many different business models, auto companies in many cases, right, don't manufacture cars. They run a supply chain of lots of other very big companies who sell parts to many companies and then, right, fit into both the marketing and the, end product. But it's a very long cycle, and it isn't super easy to say, hey, just push out an over there update, right, that treats data differently. So I do think the decisions that are being made are going to be for the long term. Folks, we are at 12:30, which means you get to go back to work or eat lunch, and I get to thank Chelsey for joining me. One quick note, if you are interested in reading more, we did a guide that dealers used to give out. Maybe we need to print more. I'll flash it up. And it's a very consumer-friendly, like what's happening in your car that, when I was shopping for a car a couple of years ago, and I actually wanted to understand where the data was going and so forth, nobody at any of the places I went to could explain to me. It was just like, no, there's no fee for that. Or here are the things our model has that, the other model that you're looking at another, car company doesn't have. When I simply would say, oh, it's got GPS and I don't have to pay separate. So where's my data going, right? So our goal there was to provide some answers and refer people to the industry best practices. So anyway, if you are in the industry, like I don't know, a car company or a tech company, and you are interested in discussing with me or Chelsey some of the work that we're doing around cameras in the cars and some of the privacy by design work, be in touch. Take a look at the mobility section of our site that highlights Chelsey's work. And thank you all for joining us. We will talk to you next week, probably about the identification, I think, is next on our chart. So Jackson, Payal, thanks for kicking us off today. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks, Chelsey.
Thanks, Paul.